Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by ST and Digital. I'm your host, David Brickley. Each and every episode, we interview the experts and have them drop their knowledge and give their advice on the ever-changing digital, social, and marketing landscape. This one's going to be a special one. Bonnie Bernstein, you've seen her on CBS, ESPN, a veteran broadcaster that has done some amazing work at the top television networks and sports broadcasting companies in the world. She will join us. She also is the owner of her very own production company where they produce some amazing documentaries. I'm excited to talk to her about that as well. But Will, this is episode 56. And of course, those of you who just joined the program, you know that we always look down the list of athletic greats. We tee it up with what episode we're on, and we call it That Athlete's Podcast. So we'll throw it to you on the famous 56. I think Sean Merriman is the only number that comes to mind on the NFL side.
Usually I give you a list and I'll let you pick from one of the three or four.
Just don't let this be the Sean Merriman podcast. There's got to be a better 56.
This one we're going to go with arguably the defensive GOAT, number 56, Lawrence Taylor, LT.
Lawrence Taylor was 56. Okay. So you're just making an executive decision over there that I can't choose?
Yeah. You got to give it to LT here.
All right. You know, if we were in the studio, Will, I would not allow this to be possible. But since we're, on Zoom, I'm going to let this one slide. No, but I agree. Let's make this the LT podcast. And I think it's perfect because Bonnie is from New York. She lives a couple miles, I think, away from Central Park. And we got a New Yorker on the program and a New Yorker for the episode number. All right. So once again, you've seen her on CBS and ESPN. She has a lot of great knowledge she's going to be able to drop on us. I'm super excited to talk to her about this time. Once again, Bonnie Bernstein on the podcast. All right, so you are familiar with her work on ESPN and CBS. She is now the owner of Walks With Me Productions. Bonnie Bernstein joins me on the Business Social podcast. Bonnie, thanks so much for the time.
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited that we connected and that you're on the show. There's so much to talk about. You and I spoke last week as well, prior to the podcast, just about the time we're going through right now with this whole COVID-19 pandemic. You've done it all on the journalism side, on the broadcast side. I guess I would love to, you know what, let's back up. Let's start with what you're currently doing. Let's educate the audience a little bit, those that may not know of your work, just your passion, your career thus far, and what you've been working on as of late.
Well, to go back to, interestingly enough, the mid-90s, ESPN hired me just before my 25th birthday, and they moved me to Chicago predominantly to cover the Bulls' second three-peat. So the fact that The Last Dance is launching, last night I spent 2 hours reliving so much of my early network life. So that was a lot of fun. Between ESPN, 10 years there cumulatively, CBS, 8 years there, sort of my bread and butter early on was covering the NBA, but when I got to CBS, covering predominantly NFL, NCAA basketball, and then transitioning from sideline reporting to do a lot of hosting studio shows and stuff like that. But I think ultimately, David, I always realized that I had this entrepreneurial spirit and I wanted to be able to do something on my own. So before I started Walk Swiftly Productions, I actually went to work for Jerry Reinsdorf's digital media company. Reinsdorf, of course, owns the Bulls and the White Sox.
Yep.
Silver Chalice is the name of his digital media company, and I was VP of content and brand development for one of their networks called Campus Insiders, where I was doing a lot of on-air work, hosting a daily show, but also really diving headfirst into all of the different verticals of our industry that typically as talent you don't get access to, whether it was distribution platforms, marketing and social strategy, being able to go on sales pitches with our guys and working with creative services on our decks, and really just getting an understanding and a foundation of new skill sets to ultimately start the production company. In the first couple of years, we've been very lucky, multi-part docu-series on esports, kind of like Hard Knocks for collegiate esports that aired on ESPN, did a series. I'm a huge country music fan, so I did a college football series for CMT about experiencing game day through the eyes of country artists that love college football as much as we do, and was working on a series for the XFL, their premium series called For the Love of Football, just storytelling around all of the amazing things going on with the XFL. Obviously, the league didn't make it because of the pandemic. So that was disappointing, but ultimately it was just a great opportunity to be diving headfirst into football.
So when we spoke, it was an inspiring conversation because, you set all that up perfectly because you've really done a great job in your career to be well-rounded. I think we saw with the ESPN layoffs a couple of years ago, a lot of people that were amazing at their job, but maybe they were, one-man band or one-woman band in terms of, they just wrote articles or they were just sideline reporters. And now, what you saw when they made those major layoffs is that people that can do a lot of it. You saw Adam Schefter do basketball sideline reports, something he never did before. But especially I would like to bring that up in this COVID-19 time. As a company, STN, we've had this shift almost immediately on different services we offered and things like that. Talk about the broadcast industry right now and with your friends and colleagues and just being in it, what you've seen from an innovation standpoint and also how you think it changes.
It's such a salient observation, David. One of the reasons why I wanted to branch out is here's the reality. Our industry has no semblance of security. Yeah. You could be there one day and at the top of the mountain and gone the next. And to your point, the ESPN layoffs were a perfect example of that. And I think combined with the fear of that lack of security and the fact that I'm a woman in still a predominantly male-dominated business, I've always had maybe a little bit of anxiety about what I need to be doing to make sure I'm indispensable. The more skill sets you have, the less dispensable you are. And it's such a relevant conversation right now because, I've had lots of conversations with friends who are broadcasters. And there's one word that keeps coming up: pivot. Yep. I need to pivot. How do I pivot? In our industry, I think it's kind of easy if you just turn that switch on in your brain, in that we are, by the very nature of what we do, storytellers. Mm-hmm. So how can you apply that storytelling gift to other industries, whether it's doing communications for a firm that has nothing to do with sports, whether it has to do with storytelling through production and content creation? We're not stuck in sports. Journalists know how to tell stories. Journalists know how to prepare. Journalists know how to ask the great questions. Journalists know how to listen and follow up when it's applicable. And so we're just so conditioned to think that we have the ability to do one thing. But when it comes to storytellers, that one thing has practical applications across virtually every industry.
Yeah, and the anxiety you talk about, isn't that smart? For almost everybody in any industry, they constantly almost try to put yourself out of business. Like you talk about in marketing, the SWOT analysis, like, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my threats? But I think you've done a tremendous job doing that. But would that be your advice for everybody that kind of, during this time especially, you kind of look inward and say, if I'm my boss or I'm the executive at this company, how indispensable am I truly am?
I think that complacency is detrimental to your occupational health. It's not simple. For whatever reason, and I truly believe this is an innate quality, I have a hunger for growth on a daily basis. And that's not just professionally, it's personally. I constantly find myself looking in the mirror at the end of the day and asking myself, have you grown? If you have, how have you grown? And also, who have you helped and who have you been able to give back to? And that's probably a different discussion for a different question. But I think we all owe it to ourselves to constantly be challenging, being able to identify where we're really strong, but having enough sense of self to also be identifying where we're weak, where we have room to grow, and to have the courage to ask for help. Because I think that's hard for a lot of people, because when you ask for help, many of us feel that signals some sort of weakness. When I think on the other side, it's perceived completely differently. If you've built your circle of trust and you reach out to those people and say, I need help. This is an area where I want to grow. Can you be my mentor? Can you be my champion? Can you help me identify areas where I have the ability to evolve? You're always going to be better off than the person who is complacent.
I go back and I'm a San Diego State graduate, so I always enjoy going back and talking to the students. And a lot of people, I'm always amazed by this question. And the question, I'm sure you've gotten this a lot too, is like, I want to start a podcast. How do I do that? And I say, go to Best Buy and get a $20 Logitech headset and Google, how do I start a podcast? And And I think, what do you think that is? 'Cause I think a lot of people in our industry, I don't know if it's parenting, I don't know if it's self-confidence, but to your point, like if you want to learn how to edit video, you can go on YouTube and find yourself a tutorial and teach yourself. We're in this amazing industry now, but I feel like a lot of people don't have that natural ability to say, "Oh, I'm just going to figure it out myself."
I think there's this inclination to think that it's harder than just Googling.
Yeah.
Remember, there was a time when you and I were growing up when search engines did not exist. Computers, the way we know them today, did not exist. The ability to pivot and learn a new skill set in 2020, it's never been an easier proposition because all you have to do is Google it. To your point, when I started out in the broadcast business and I was working in teeny tiny little TV markets, I did everything. I wrote, I physically edited, but at the time, those were on linear systems. And one of the things that I've thought about doing, depending on how long we're on lockdown here in New York City, I need to get into digital editing for lots of reasons. Just to be able to edit a quick reel, to put together a sizzle reel for a show I'm pitching, to be able to enhance my website. There are all sorts of different things, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. How do we continue to evolve? And evolution in 2020 is as simple as popping open your computer, connecting to the Wi-Fi and Googling what it is that you want to learn.
Yeah, it truly is amazing how you can create a multi-million-dollar company with a laptop and going to Starbucks. I mean, I just don't think we realize how awesome we have it. To your point, like the world is your oyster. I mean, it has never been so easy, I guess, to kind of go after those things. Let's go back about a month or so ago when all this COVID-19 stuff starts to go down. You seem like a super positive person, but would love to hear from you, like, we both work in sports and you're more on the broadcast side, but you're working with the XFL and this documentary and this news comes down. How did everything for you just kind of set in with you when it first went down?
Funny you asked that. I was just having this conversation with a life coach on Sunday, and I was with a group of people, and he asked to share one way that you have sort of had an epiphany during the pandemic. And for me, it was exactly what you asked about. Because if I rewinded and went back to life as the way I used to process 10 years ago, and my biggest production client went bankrupt, I would have been beside myself. I know I would have sunk into a depression. I would have been inconsolable. I might not have gotten out of bed for a couple of days. Fast forward to today. And while the initial shock of hearing that the client filed for Chapter 11, my thought process was the complete antithesis of woe is me, I'm the victim, I can't believe this is happening. Complete opposite. I immediately thought, what do I have to be grateful about for this opportunity? And there's so much stuff, David. I advanced my network. The content that we delivered was so wholeheartedly and enthusiastically embraced from everybody, from the commissioner to the COO to the head of content to the head of comms to the head of operations to the head of social. And it's a difficult position for all of us. But when you find yourself in this bucket that is just overflowing with challenges, what have we learned that we all have the ability to do? We have the ability to come together and support. And so I think what we've all said to each other is, you got to embrace the suck. It's not our fault. We can't control it, but what we can control is how we help each other get through this and provide opportunities down the road. So I know as starting to look at different opportunities, I can call any one of those folks in leadership at the XFL, be like, hey, would you mind sending a text or sending a recommendation or being a champion? And without question, I know any one of them would have picked up the phone. So there's a little piece of me that as I articulate this to you and as I did to the life coach on Sunday, I'm like, wow, I've come a long way. And at the end of the day, if there is one message that I think we all need to be sharing, is just find a way to be grateful and positive, because we're all going through this.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed two different people in our industry. One is completely paralyzed by the moment, and I don't want to be insensitive. I don't know. They just don't want to move one way or the other. They're just kind of stuck in this. I don't know what to do. We're just going to wait it out and see what happens. And then there's another side of the industry like yourself, I think, where okay, I've said this on the podcast a bunch, but it's like, this sucks. We all agree. But how are we now going to pivot? How are we going to be innovative? How are we going to be creative? And just kind of, I think, having that conversation with yourself that says, this is what the current situation is. So I can either fight against it and continue to move forward, or I could be paralyzed. And I'd much rather, pick the one where, like you said, what did I learn? How was I productive today? How did I push forward?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with where each of us is in our evolution process. Here's the reality, right?
Yep.
You can yell, woe is me, for as far as people are willing to listen. It ain't going to pay your mortgage. It ain't going to feed your kids little mouths. It's not going to help resolve the situation. So it's not for me to judge how anybody copes with these situations. What I do know is what's productive and what's not. And that's not to say that you can't give yourself time to grieve, if you will. That's okay. But at some point, for your longevity, for your profitability, for your sanity, and mental health, I think, is a huge part of this. You have to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and move on, because nobody's giving handouts right now. So you got to go find it yourself. Yeah,
I remember, and I would love for you to share some stories. I know you have some. I remember like when my business partner approached me and said that he wanted to leave the company, how crushed I was that hour that he told me that. And I look back at that situation. No, but I look back at the situation. It's the greatest gift he ever gave me in my life. I mean, just it propelled me to be a leader. It propelled me to build a team underneath me that I wanted to create. And it's just like the most awesome gift that anybody can give me. And I would love to hear from you throughout your career. I'm sure there has been some low points or some moments where you said, gosh, why me? Or why can I get that opportunity? Or why did this have to happen? And then ultimately you look back at it and smile because, shoot, if that didn't happen, I would be in a much, much different place.
Well, I think on the talent side, we've all been in situations where we see an opportunity out there and we don't get it for whatever reason. When I was younger, I would have a propensity to internalize that. What did I do wrong? Was I not qualified? And blame it on myself, when ultimately I had to realize, and this is so much the case when it comes to on-air talent, there's just a level of subjectivity around decision-making for on-air folks that you don't know what they're looking for, and maybe you're educated, you're not. We talked about pivoting earlier. To pivot from talent to somebody who is a content creator and the founder of a production company, I would say it took me 6 years. And this was a very sort of slow evolution before I technically launched the production company. But I started pitching creative ideas well before that because I knew I had to shift the narrative. I can't tell you how many distribution platforms I went to pitch what I thought was a very well-baked idea. And folks in content leadership looked me dead in the face and said, you're not going to be taken seriously because you're talent. And it was a really tough pill to swallow, David, because as a journalist, I pride myself in preparation, research, being thorough, and coming to the table, not just with a concept, but a fully baked idea. What's the episodic layout, where the potential brand integration, like everything from soup to nuts. I did everything I felt I could do within my power to just have somebody look you dead in the face and completely write you off because you're talent. Initially, it was so deflating, but it comes back to what I said before. I could let it kill me. Right. I could let it shred my ego 6 ways to Sunday, but it's not going to enable me to accomplish ultimately what I want to accomplish. And like anything, and it's easy to use the sports analogy because everything comes with reps. Everything comes with reps and just needing one person to open that door for you. And that one person for me was Rob King at ESPN, who at the time was overseeing digital, and now he's, I think, SVP of all original content and like a million different other things. But Rob, when he was running digital, I came to him with an idea about showcasing successful women who were competitive athletes. And the inspiration was, as a former student athlete, I did gymnastics at Maryland, I came across this research that pointed to more than 80% of the female executives in America coming from a competitive sports background. And they spoke to how the characteristics and skill sets that you cultivate as an athlete, how you're able to parlay that into professional success. He gave me the opportunity to bring that idea to life. And while I wasn't directly overseeing production, it was my little baby, and I had the chance to build it out. And just from that one opportunity, I was able to create a case study. Look, I can do this. And here's another idea. So it was a very, very slow build to be able to truly pivot and put myself in a position where now I have the network to be able to open those doors. And I have case studies consisting of quality content that I can present to potential partners.
That's awesome. One account that we work on with NBC Sports, it's called On Her Turf, and it's really a brand. Yeah. So it's a brand that really focuses on female exceptionalism, on the athletic side and front office, things like that. And I wanted to get your take because I think you have the ability to really speak on this in a great way, especially in broadcasting, right? When you look at Doris Burke and then you look at also Katie Sowers in the NFL, and just like the growth of the female athlete, the female executive, the female on the sidelines, and how far that has grown. I would love to just get your take, being in the industry, what you've seen in terms of positive change in that regard.
It's been amazing. It's been gradual, but it comes back to what I mentioned before. There are some people, and it's frustrating for me, and I appreciate Title IX as much as anybody. I am a byproduct of Title IX. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of legislation that's created opportunity from an athletic standpoint for so many girls and young women. But there is a contingent of people who are constantly railing on men because there aren't enough women in our industry. And I say we have to embrace all of those men who have given us opportunity, because the industry is what it is. There are more women than there ever were before, whether it's broadcasting or officials or in leadership. To this day, Amy Trask is still the only female CEO ever in the NFL. Katie's one of the few officials. We'll start seeing that more and more. And Doris is just like the OG when it comes to people. But by and large, those doors didn't open themselves. Men opened them for us. So it's been incredible to see, but we're still not quite at the point where we're not making huge headlines every time a woman does something for the first time. I don't know that I'll see that in my lifetime, and I don't necessarily know that I need to. Merely that we have seen progress is really encouraging to me.
That's awesome. I want to talk about The Last Dance. You and I were just talking about that before the show. And you actually spent some time covering the Bulls back during their second three-peat. We were kind of joking as people that understand the industry a little bit better, why don't they just release it already? Like, it's not done yet. So to your point, it's probably not even done in terms of episodes 9 and 10. That's why they're kind of pushing it out. But I think it's amazing, right? Like I did a quick piece this weekend, but just how sports, for me anyway, reminds me of family. It just sports has this incredible emotion for me. And I know it does for a lot of the people in our country. But it was incredible. I think the numbers, 6.3 million viewers on Sunday. Obviously, we're in this, again, COVID-19 time. But I'd love to get your thoughts on if you watched it and if you enjoyed it so far.
I did. I've been looking forward to this. So that video has been in the vault since the 97-98 season. And myriad directors have tried to convince Jordan to do this documentary, because the only way NBA's cameras were able to get the level of access they did in that final season was by telling Michael Jordan, you have full editorial control, which if you're on the production side of things, that's like unheard of.
Crazy.
So Spike Lee, a bunch of different people went to Michael Jordan hoping that the time was right for this to happen. And Jordan always said no. But I knew that video existed, and I've just been waiting to see when we were all finally going to get to see it. It's very personal for me because that was the first sport that I covered at the network level. And I feel very fortunate that Michael was very good to me. Phil was
what a team and a sport to start with, huh?
Well, I know they
At the
do.
top.
This is a true story. So one of my first assignments they said, it was right when camp was starting for the Bulls, and they said, go up to the Berto Center, their practice facility, and go get a one-on-one with Michael Jordan. I just turned 25. I'm like, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. So go up there with my crew. I walk up to Jordan. I extend my hand. I'm like, hi, I'm Bonnie. I'm the new kid on the block. I need to get a one-on-one with you. We're going to be set up over there. And the guy's looking at me like, who are you?
Yeah.
But it was really one of those situations, David, where ignorance was bliss. Little did I know those one-on-ones would come few and far between during those last 3 years. But there is a sentimentality about the whole series for me, because that's where I really got my start. I also have an appreciation from a production standpoint about how many cooks are in this kitchen. So it's ESPN, it's Netflix, it's the NBA, it's Mandalay, and then it's Jordan and his team, Estee Portnoy, who's been, Estee's been his longtime right hand. All of these different creative forces trying to, jockey for what it is that they felt was best for the series. That's a really heavy lift.
Yeah.
And the other pieces, particularly for the first episode, understanding that there's going to be a huge contingent of folks just like me, who we grew up and we had the great fortune of being able to watch these Bulls in real time, but there are going to be tons and tons of kids who weren't born yet, who were too young to remember, who they probably hear all these conversations about whether LeBron or Michael is the best ever, but they don't have that sample size to consume. So now they're viewing it through a newcomer's lens. And especially in that first episode, when you're teeing everything up, how are you constructing it in a way in that those of us who've been there are still into it, where you're doing that education thing for the younger audience? It's very difficult, as is just figuring out creatively how to be in real time, meaning that season, and then flashing back to.
Yeah, I was wondering what you thought about that, it was very interesting. I haven't seen much documentaries do it. They're flashing back quite a bit. They're going to 98, going back to, when Jordan was born, then going back to 98 for a little bit, then going back to 1985. I haven't seen that done too much. It didn't bother me at all. I thought it was pretty cool, actually, because when you say, why is Jordan so gosh dang competitive? All right, let's take you back to the house that he grew up in and his brother and his dad. And it gives you that context, but it's definitely an interesting way they did it.
There are all different ways you can do it, but what I found that they've done really well is you have to find that critical soundbite that lends itself to transition back.
Yep.
So it's the audio piece, but then the visual piece where they're creating that timeline. It's really hard. That's one of the things that I dealt with in doing the esports documentary for ESPN is what's the most effective, not disruptive way to do it. And it's much more challenging than you might expect as somebody who's seeing the final product. I can't imagine how much conversation and creative ideation went into settling on that visual time.
Right. Yeah. All right. So what I've really realized during this whole time, I'm sure you have as well, is this, for my psyche, how much I look forward to it, growing up a Lakers fan, looking forward to a game, talking about the games with friends and family. There's some friends of mine that I only connect with them on just the Lakers. So I've kind of lost that connection because there's no more games. I'm in a fantasy football league for 18 years. The only reason I see some of those guys yearly is because of this sport that brings you together. I don't know. I've been pretty amazed of just how much sports, I knew it was so important, but how much it's tied to your family and the culture and relationships. And when you take it all away, like when you started in sports and when I started in sports, I never could imagine a time where sports across the entire globe stopped. Maybe a sport, maybe even during like a world war, there's probably areas that you can still have some sports going on. When you actually sit down and think about this thing and look at what we're going through right now, this is a pretty unprecedented, incredible time we're going through right now.
What's crazy about it? We always look to sports to bring us together during difficult times. And I'm not sure there's a better example of that in our lifetime than 9/11.
100%.
Now we're being told that congregating at sports events is the most dangerous thing on earth we can do. I actually put out what I thought was a really interesting Twitter poll, I think it was last week, because I've had all sorts of conversations about when's going to be the right time. Now, part of that is tied to widespread testing, the development and mass distribution of a vaccine, being able to contact trace. And getting an understanding of when this country truly has herd immunity, where we've got those immunity, we've got the antibodies in our system, and chances are we won't get it again. But there's also the psychological aspect. We have now been conditioned to stand and walk and congregate 6 feet apart. So how are we going to feel when we get the green light to go to sporting events? What the Twitter poll results told me is that there's about 30 to 35% of the people, and I had several people respond, so I don't know, it feels like a good roundabout survey, but about 30% feel like we're ready to go back right away. But almost 60% said either they wanted to wait longer or not anytime soon.
Yeah, I read a study that 72% of sports fans would not go to a sporting event unless there was a vaccine, which may be 18 months away. Yeah, I just don't see anytime soon that 18,000 are packing into the Staples Center shoulder to shoulder to watch a basketball game.
Conversations, and I know for sure. One of my mentors is in the performing arts space, and theaters, for example, are talking about moving to this checkerboard seating system whereby there are several seats, but then they also have to figure out, well, you could have 2 or 3 seats between you.
But then you got to go. Yeah.
But then if you're still got a person who's a foot away from you in front of you or behind you, well, that's not resolving the situation. So I think there are going to have to be all sorts of conversations in stadiums that we're not going to be talking about experiencing a game at full capacity, 100,000+ at the Big House in Michigan or any of the stadiums. I don't know when we're going to see that again.
Yeah, maybe to your point, if they go with that system, the 100,000 at Michigan Stadium becomes 5,000 people spread out all around. Yeah, but is 5,000 better than 0? I mean, it's going to be a gradual increase, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Not so much the fear, but just I guess, how quickly we get back to normal. And I think to your point, I think until there's like a vaccine or like, hey, there's a prescription drug that if you or I get it, you go to the doctor, you get your prescription, a week later, you're back on your feet. And if you know that in the back of your head, then you'll probably be much more likely. But I'm scared, like, if you and I see each other, do I give you a handshake? Do I give you a hug? Do I stay away? Like, it's going to be
next to a random fan that you've never met before and your team scores a touchdown. You're going to high five and bro hug them.
Yeah, exactly.
There are so many different things that I think may play out differently because of the way we are now being conditioned to be apart rather than together.
Well, and I think that's what you and I were talking about last week is, I think SportsCenter spent $100 million on their SportsCenter set. They've obviously had some issues with, Instagram and House of Highlights and Bleacher Report. That's kind of how the new generation, gets their highlights, right? They don't have to necessarily tune in to ESPN for an hour to get the latest highlight. But I think, with this going through this pandemic, I wonder, can Scott Van Pelt just host a show from his house, just like we're doing on Skype? And are we going into a whole new era of broadcasting where the old school way of, linear and big budgets and huge cameras that are 6 feet long, is that going to be necessary? And now have we kind of conditioned the audience that it's okay to have a Zoom conversation and they'll be fine with it?
Well, I think the younger audience is already conditioned. I think where the hang up has those of us who are used to traditional broadcasting with high production value, very polished 4K video have been reticent to adapt.
Yeah.
What we're seeing now is that we're being forced to adapt, and it's being wholeheartedly embraced. I think there is going to be that shift in thinking, and the pandemic is expediting that. To your point, from a production budget standpoint, I'm curious to see if the pandemic turns our industry and the entertainment industry overall on its head.
Yeah.
Because we have the ability to create rich, engaging content for really cheap, let's be realistic, next to nothing. Like if you have a good Instagram live going, you might create some graphics, but relative to what you would put into budget-wise for a customary production, it's peanuts. So how's that ultimately going to change our industry? Our network's going to feel the need to fly correspondents from one side of the country to the other for a studio show. If you can just give them a really nice ring light and a quality mic, and stick them in front of your computer and make sure that the computer's propped up so you're not looking down at it,
right,
and do it from home. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the very path we wind up going down.
Yeah, because I think the executives are starting to understand, like, wait a second, we can do this much cheaper. And then secondly, there's going to be, after this thing kind of opens up, there's going to be a time, a few quarters at least, when you look at like at ESPN and Disney, where they're going to try to make up all these losses from Q1, Q2. So they're not going to be really big on, to your point, let's send a bunch of people to maybe some sport events that don't give us that much ROI. They're probably going to pull back on that. So I feel like we're going to be in this for, even if they wanted to go back to how it was, for a year, 18 months, 2 years, we're going to see these scaled back productions. And to your point, if we go that long with scaled back productions, does that then enable the entire industry to essentially do just that, scale back?
Well, yeah, and from an ad perspective, there are going to be all sorts of conversation about make goods and what do they look like. And we've been having this conversation for a while that the gap between the linear and digital CPM is starting to close. I think it's totally going to expedite that, because if you think conceptually about going where your audience is and when you're projecting impressions, we know that there is this massive social audience right now, and they're engaging. So there's two pieces to that. It's what do the CPMs look like on the ad side, and how are you creating content that truly is engaging? And yes, it's about impressions, but truly creating something that incites and inspires conversation and really touches the heart of the target audience you're trying to reach.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to go too far. Like, the Last Dance documentary is shot beautifully. They obviously went to these people's homes. It's gorgeous. It's a piece of art. That I don't agree would ever be on Skype or anything like that. But when you're talking about what The Jump is doing on ESPN right now, or you're talking about, Skip and Shannon at Fox Sports, who's shooting out of, Skip's house with a couple guys in his garage pushing the linear, it's a lot cheaper than having 25 people on a multi-million-dollar set. So yeah, I'm very interested in that. And then to your point about fans not able to go see their favorite team live, of course, in the grand scheme of things, you can only fit 20,000 in a basketball arena, 50,000, 60,000 NFL, maybe 100,000 in college. But how does that affect the TV experience? Because you look at a sport like the MLB, majority of their money comes from the gate. So each game they don't have is really going to hurt their revenue. So TV deals or streaming deals are going to be that much different. I just wonder have you thought about how they're going to show these different events on TV without any fans? Do they pipe in fans? Do they, have different fan bases on Zoom where they can cut to, after big plays? But I've wondered how they're going to do that, especially in the interim.
Well, that begs the question, why are people tuning in to watch a game? Are they really tuning in to hear the fans? It is nice and sometimes almost detrimental when the crowd noise is so loud that you can't hear the game call. It's the bane of my existence sometimes, because I'm the type of person who, when I'm watching a football game, I really want to hear the play-by-play and the color.
You want to hear Tony Romo predict what's going to happen next. It's important.
Who doesn't, right? So there's that. But these conversations have been ongoing for years. And I think college football bowl games are a great example. A lot of these bowl games aren't filling up stadiums. The focus is on the TV viewing experience, or, in the case of ESPN, you can also watch those on the app. So it's tech bells and whistles and all sorts of creative elements that truly enhance what you're feeling when you're watching a TV broadcast beyond the actual.
Well, and that with the XFL, I mean, there was a couple thousand people in the stands. They shot tighter and they didn't focus on the fan reaction.
But you know what they also focused on, David? Betting. Yeah. And we're already starting to have that conversation. And I've said to a lot of folks, which is going to be the first network that truly starts integrating betting into the conversation? We would always joke that Brett Musburger, who's now running BSIN, was an avid, he loved and was totally in all of that stuff. But for a time that was poo-pooed. Now, as each of these states pass betting legislation, we understand the value of these new revenue streams. Where is that going to fit into the broadcast landscape? And if we are experiencing a period where we're not feeling those fans during the broadcast, is this an opportunity to start baking in more of that conversation around betting?
My favorite story on that is Al Michaels. There was a prop bet on the Super Bowl, how many times he would mention Deflategate. Over under was 4.
I think I saw that.
At the top of the show, he says, I know there's a prop bet going on, so Deflategate, 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 Deflategate. There you go. You got the over.
There you go.
So, yeah, these guys know it well. I think they've done a good job of integrating fantasy football, and you'll see fantasy scores. You'll see the broadcasters talk about, hey, that helped somebody's fantasy game, or a backup running back will come in and they'll say that helped nobody. So they've done a good job of that. You mentioned esports, and I know you've worked closely in that as well. And I think, I've even brought this up a lot, where I think it's very interesting because it really plays to both genders, right? Anybody can pick up a controller. It really doesn't have anything to do with your being a physical athlete, but it really plays the same type of thing, the same script that sports has done in terms of covering it, in terms of fandom, in terms of, propping these gamers up like athletes. It really is kind of following that same script.
Well, and what you're seeing is, if there is any beneficiary in the sports world of the pandemic, it's esports.
1,000%.
Because they live online, they play online. Now, certainly for championships like grand finals for League of Legends or the Dota International, people will come from all over the world to sit in an arena and experience that. And when I tell you, it is wall-to-wall standing room only of people who are cheering as loud as anything we've experienced during a football or basketball game or what have you. But merely by the fact that they are played online, that's put them in a really strong position. And there's been an ongoing conversation with traditional sports platforms determining, is this something we want to put on our air? Is there enough of a crossover demographic? Now they're in a position where traditional sports is on. Yeah. They still have to fill their programming grids, right? So they say, yeah, why not? And I think what's so interesting about that is that if you look at the global popularity of games, it's not Madden or 2K or FIFA or MLB The Show that are the most popular games globally. It's League of Legends, it's Counter-Strike, it's Overwatch, it's Fortnite, it's Call of Duty. But I don't know if you've had a chance to do this. I did, and I'm not even, I don't care. But the Mets are my baseball team.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry.
It's okay. But this is what true loyalty looks like.
Yeah, that's good.
So a lot of regional sports networks that are supposed to have a whole regular slate of games, they don't have them. So they are running the esports version of it. And last week, I found myself on SNY watching what would have been a real live Mets-Astros game. I was watching MLB The Show. And for as sophisticated as they are right now, it was actually a really fun watch. Yeah. So it's enabling traditional sports platforms just to play around, take the temperature, see what the ratings look like, see what the engagement.
Well, were you impressed by Fox Sports and iRacing? I was blown away.
Oh yeah, iRacing.
I think 1.2 million was the rating, but it was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these traditional sports platforms are starting to embrace it. The 2K tournament that ESPN did, it's all over the place now, and I think that's only going to, speed up the upward trajectory in esports that we've already been seeing.
Everybody's given all these networks a lot of credit because they're trying, and even, I watched or listened to the Howard Stern interview with Tom Brady. He was on Zoom, and it cut out 7 times, and Howard Stern's losing his mind. Like, I can't deal with this. And they finally went to the phone, and it was fine. But, as we're going through this time, I think we all understand, and, you kind of have that. But I will say for ESPN, the whole horse tournament has been a colossal failure, at least in terms of technology and on Twitter and things like that. So you got to give them credit for trying. But I think the NBA 2K tournament performed a lot better than the horse tournament.
You would be surprised, apparently, how few players actually have basketball courts at their houses.
I know. Steph Curry, best shooter ever in history, doesn't have a basketball hoop.
Yeah,
crazy.
So I'm not quite sure they anticipated running up against that problem. Yeah, but ultimately, that was one of the challenges they faced.
Horse is tough, man. It seems like a good idea, but it's not that exciting of a sport to watch. They've tried that a few times.
I credit them for trying.
Absolutely. I know you're friends with Colin Cowherd, and I've been a big fan of his over the years. And he was on a Ryan Russillo podcast recently on The Ringer, and I thought you'd made a brilliant point. And you and I have been talking about it already on this show. Is he really says, I'm going to go where the audience is. I'm not going to just be siloed to my broadcast audience, rather on radio. I want to have I want to be simulcast on TV, but I also don't want to put all my eggs in that basket because linear year over year is going down. I want to have a podcast as well. I want to have my social media going well. And just that same idea from finances that we've learned, diversify your assets. And I think we've never been in a time that's more true that you need to do that, because you really don't know where the media landscape will be 2, 3, 5 years down the road. Or if COVID-19 happens and completely shifts the entire industry even faster than that.
Sure. Well, here's our reality. We have never been more fragmented from a content consumption standpoint as we are right now. Take COVID out of it. That's just our reality. Growing up, we had 3 television networks, 3, not 4. Fox wasn't even in the picture for a while. We didn't have cable systems that offered us 200, 300 channels. We didn't have, there was no such thing as digital content. There was no such thing as branded content. Radio was terrestrial radio, not Sirius XM radio. Now we have myriad options. And I know this is Colin's strategy because we've talked about it. The fact of the matter is the time slot where his show is going live isn't going to get a ton of eyeballs. So he has strategically put together a team that's very strong on the social side. So anytime something comes out, his commentary, something that one of the people he's interviewing says, anytime that happens and there's an opportunity for it to be for mass consumption or for it to go viral, that gets clipped and it gets pushed down on social. And you have to have this comprehensive strategy to take what is taped in real time and chop it up and distribute it to reach all of these different audiences. And I think one of the most important takeaways from that on a more micro level, David, is that content is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. You have to understand first who your audience is, second, where are they living, and third, how content best resonates on each one of these individual platforms. Like I know you have this conversation all the time with all of your STN clients.
Yeah.
What works on Twitter doesn't work on Instagram, which definitely won't work on Snap, which is a totally different bag than linear radio. And you have to be thinking and have people in those positions of leadership who are determining what that content looks like and how it's getting pushed out, that it all has to be customized for your audience and the platform. And that's where I think a lot of brands are still trying to wrap their heads around what this all looks like, because now brands are all becoming their own content creators, whether they have those production facilities in-house or they're working with an agency. There's a whole conversation around taking one piece of content and how to divvy that up into digestible chunks to reach a specific audience on a specific platform.
Yeah, and I talk about it all the time, how, I always use the same analogy. I said, you would never take a radio commercial and throw it on TV, because you'd totally be missing out on the entire visual platform that is linear television. So why would you take a 16:9 30-second promo and throw it on Instagram? You're not being genuine to that platform in most cases. But I use this example all the time. I say, NBC Must See Thursdays, as we remember, they constantly, you have Seinfeld and you have ER and you have, all these different programs, but, they had different showrunners. They tried different time slots. They're constantly looking at linear ratings and moving stuff around.
Remember, Seinfeld was going to get
100%.
killed and they changed the time slot. So you constantly have to be experimenting.
And they had a certain demo, a richer demo that made over $100,000 that made sense to have a lower rating, but the people that were watching were spending more cash, I guess. But the point is, linear networks have done a good job of that. They're constantly deleting shows or bringing shows in to kind of see what the perfect recipe is. And at the brand level, hey, just throw this on social. Hey, Colin said something cool, throw it on social. And what you mentioned is, let's create this bite-sized piece of content that works properly for those different channels.
And then there's a whole other level if you're dealing with influencers, because it's very appealing when a brand is looking at an influencer and saying, oh, look how huge their platform is. Well, you can poke holes in a lot of that. A, you don't know if they're buying followers. B, if you're only looking at that number, you're not getting a true sense for engagement. They may have followers, but it's not the audience that you want to reach. And a lot of times there is a huge disconnect there. So again, just like we talked about how some platforms and how brands have been slow to embrace digital, a lot of brands are slow to embrace analytics, and they don't understand the value in that data in truly drilling down who it is that you're trying to reach, and from an
Yep.
influencer standpoint, who you are tapping to reach that audience. Because if those two things aren't aligning, you're spending a whole lot of money that ultimately you are wasting.
1,000%. Not so much the top 25 cable networks, but do you think a lot of cable networks will go under because of COVID?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I found myself wondering what the amenability is if they're an ad-driven platform, if they are relying solely on those ad dollars, because we keep hearing all the forecasts that Q2 is going to be the toughest.
Mm-hmm.
So if brands are saying we are pencils down, we're pulling back on the ad spend, are they willing to accept make goods or shift to programming that aligns with where their audience wants to be? And I almost wonder, and you're probably you are definitely more the expert on this than I am. I feel like that's a brand and agency conversation, that the viability of some of these smaller networks is heavily reliant upon ads, because that's how they're generating the predominance of their revenue. And if that's not there, what's plan B? And do you have the ability to pivot quickly? Do you have the ability to secure small business loans to keep yourself afloat as you figure out what that plan B strategy looks like? So there are a lot of factors in there. And sometimes I wonder if it's not the distribution platform itself, but the brands and the agencies who are holding those purse strings.
And if they've built that amazing brand value, Complex is a great brand, Bleacher Report's a great brand, and before it's like, let's start this brand on digital and maybe find a way to bring it up to linear. I think there's going to be a lot of linear channels that have great brand value and people recognize it, and they may say, okay, no more linear. Let's bring this down to a digital only platform because we have an audience. We can take those folks with us, but we can have a lot more, I guess, success on digital just from a cost perspective than trying to knock out these original programs every single day.
Well, that's one of the things that Sports Illustrated has been in the process of doing, and has just had all sorts of issues in this pandemic, has been even more crippling for them. Here you have a legacy brand. For those of us who are, in my age group, I waited every week for that magazine to come. I have boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of magazines that someday when I grow up and get a big girl house, I want to allocate an entire basement wall to all these different covers. But so, they went from weekly to monthly to, really trying to shift the strategy to digital, to trying to do all of these micro sites through Maven. And it's a really challenging proposition. The business model all along. I know you had mentioned linear, but this is print, but it's not altogether different. Just taking what you know and what you've lived and what's been profitable for so long and shifting to reach this audience. And just like brands are constantly having the conversation about how do we generate that new generation of audience, content platforms are thinking the same way, and you have to go where they are. And all the kids are on digital now. They're all on their second screens.
Yeah, I thought Turner Sports did a really brilliant thing back in 2014? But when they purchased Bleacher Report, they purchased, I think, an entire generation, a culture, a brand. So when things like this happen and maybe linear's not doing too well, Bleacher and House of Highlights and these different things, maybe not House of Highlights with lack of highlights, but you know what I mean? That it's nice to have that part of your business. And again, diversify your assets like we talked about earlier. The linear networks that have diversified their app, the fact that Disney Plus launched before all this thing went down, that's probably the only thing right now that's making them money on the positive, because their theme parks are unavailable. Their linear channels don't have as much ad revenue. So I think they're probably thanking God that they moved as quick as they did on that.
Well, from a highlight perspective too, I know House of Highlights has done this. I've seen a lot of this on ESPN. The highlights are highlights. They're not just highlights that we're accustomed to looking at, being professional football players and professional basketball players and college basketball players. It's everyday people doing very fun
beer pong shots.
Beer pong, like the one where like the grandson has all the pots and all sorts of stuff.
Great.
So they're highlights. They just look different, and in a way, I think one of the unintended positive consequences of it is that everyday people are having the chance to engage in a different way, are being recognized in a different way. My question is, when we get back to normal and sports open up shop again, is the fan going to be as important as they've become? Because the fan has become more important than they ever have, because they are generating content. They are filling gaps. Now, user-generated content is a term that we've come to know and love in our world, particularly because it's free and awesome. But now it's serving a completely different purpose in that it's filling out content grids.
Do you have a few more minutes to go? I know we're at 3 o'clock. I just want to make sure I wasn't
I
cutting time.
do. I'm actually teaching a class at 6:45, and I need a half hour to pull some stuff together. But I got.
So we can wrap in 5 or 10 minutes. Cool. What was that last thought I had on that? Okay. All right. So I haven't really talked about with anybody on the podcast at length, but I've been dying to speak with somebody. I think you're the perfect person. When it comes to starting sports back up, there's these ideas. I guess I want to get your thoughts. Let's start with the NBA. If we truly quarantine these guys in Vegas, maybe with their families, and they played, at UNLV Stadium or what have you, and they all a different team had its own, level of a hotel, and they were tested weekly. Like, I guess, what do you think the probability of it? Is that the right way? Is that, you think, the way we can get started on this? I just want to get your thoughts on, I guess, that idea or that concept, and see if it's something you think it would work.
If it gives them TV revenue, you kind of have to do it.
Yeah. I think the NBA, $450 million they're trying to recruit back, so it's a lot of money.
So is it ideal that we may be playing sports without fans? No, of course. But here's my concern. Let's think about how this all really, really got on the radar from a sports perspective. Rudy Gobert contracted COVID. Adam Silver shut the league down. One guy got it.
Yep.
So sure, you can test, and I've been quarantined for 14 days, but that doesn't mean I can't go out to the grocery store, even with a mask on, and maybe I contract it through packaging or whatever. We're being super careful, but you just never know. So what happens if you ramp the league up again and one person contracts the virus? You got to shut down again?
That's the thing. Yeah.
Weird. And we're going to have to address it at some point, right?
And I feel like if you quarantine, you'd almost have to, like, every server, every cook, every maid, everybody in that hotel would have to be tested the same way.
And they can't leave the hotel.
And they can't leave because, like you said, if they go to 7-Eleven and they pick up a Monster Energy drink, they may get it then, and then the whole thing. So as much as I want that to be a possibility to you, I really think I think when you're talking about 350 athletes, the likelihood of one of them getting it, unless they're completely in a bubble, is probably pretty likely over a 2 month, that I think all of us will probably get it at some point. It's like the flu. It's just a matter of if we have the hospital and the vaccine or what have you. But
here's the other thing, David. I live a block and a half off Central Park in New York. The fact that I live a block and a half off Central Park in New York has been my saving grace. I try to stay inside as much as I can. But the feeling of isolation when you are being told you physically can't go outside messes with your head. It's a really important part of this conversation that we are having, but it can't be had enough. And so you can create this bubble if you'd like, for the sake of making sure you are taking care of things from a revenue standpoint. But what's the human toll there? It's a really important question.
Well, and what about the person that is now quarantined with an abusive partner? What about the man or woman that has an alcohol abuse problem that shook it, but now that they lost their job, they're back to doing that again? And I think a lot of people have kind of talked about how many deaths will we have, from stuff like that, right? Like suicide rates and depression. And at a certain point, especially as Americans, when we've always been able to kind of live freely about our lives. I think we can all kind of do this for a couple of months, but at some point, we're already kind of starting to see it in some regions where people are protesting and kind of going stir crazy, right? Like that cabin fever is really going to be at an all-time high, I think, in the next month or so. So I think, to your point, it's a fine balance between, are we okay if somebody gets it and we get them medical care and we quarantine them and at least kind of open up a little bit for that mental health standpoint as well?
It's the conversation that's being had everywhere, and it's an unenviable task for anybody in a position of leadership and influence to have. how are you weighing the value of human life against the economy?
Yep.
And what are the ripple effects of all of those decisions that are made? There's no right answer.
No.
I would think that many of us think health first, life first. But we've seen this in the news. There's a strong contingent of people who say, open up the economy. We're destroying the economy, the GDP, the mental health toll that's taking on all of these people, more than 7 million people who filed for unemployment. There are myriad tentacles of each of these conversations, regardless of the direction you go in. And we're dealing with it on a micro level in sports, but it's the same conversation no matter what industry you're talking about.
My final question for you from a sports perspective is, where do you think we go from here? And I mean, obviously, I think we've all kind of understood, like, again, The Last Dance, for instance, I hate to put too much emphasis on this, but I think it really mentally soothed a lot of people to have something to look forward to and to watch this programming. And I think to your point about mental health, it's important to get back to, escapism content and that ability for that appointment view television. But well, as we look towards, I guess, the rest of the year, I guess, I know it's hard to predict this thing, but what are you looking forward to? What do you think, how do you think we shake out of this whole deal?
I don't feel terribly confident that we're going to see an NBA season. I mean, they're starting to talk about over the next couple of weeks is going to be when they get their last normal full paychecks. The league and the PA have come to agreement on this. If you asked which entity has a better chance of starting on time between the NFL and college football, NFL hands down.
100%.
Hands down. What a lot of people don't understand about college football is typically athletics directors and the head coaches, for that matter, are arguably the most powerful people on campus. Like even more than the president, the chancellor, the provost. They are.
Because they make a lot more money than anybody. Yeah.
Well, and because there is just such an overall passion for sports that it puts those folks in a position of power and authority. In this case, their hands are tied. They don't have anything to do with this for two reasons. Number one, the academia side of institutions has to determine if they're going to have fall classes online. Because if fall classes are online, you're not going to be able to get 50 to 100,000 people to congregate and sit in stands on a sunny Saturday afternoon, A, and B, there's no way you're going to justify being able to bring student athletes on campus. And that's not just football. That's any fall sport. So there's that piece. But number two, so many of these public institutions are getting state money. If Gavin Newsom in California, UCLA, Cal, any of the state schools may say, we want to open up. If Gavin Newsom says no, you won't open it. Because if you would go against that, guess what's going to disappear? Your state money. And there are seldom few athletics departments across the country that are solely funded where they're not seeking funds either from their institution or from the state. So it's a very slippery slope. And right now, ADs and commissioners, for that point, are sort of in a holding pattern, because until we figure out what's going on with academics fall semester, we can't figure out what's going on with the fall.
And there's no doubt that certain states are going to have different.
And there's going to be waves.
Right. So SEC may say go forward, but the Pac-12 is like, no way. So what's that? I guess, there's 300 schools in D1, only 150 of them participate in the 2020 season.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, David, there has to be a football season because schools already are not getting their NCAA tournament.
And by the way, football pays for every subsequent sport. Yeah.
So imagine not getting basketball tournament money and not getting football money. That equates to financial ruin for athletics departments all across the country. So I'd be hard pressed to see college football starting on time. I think it's a more likely scenario. Maybe it's October, November. I think it's an even greater scenario that we wait till after the new year, which creates some logistical issues from, stadium and stuff like that. But to be able to get a full season in and get that revenue at a time when we're closer than we would be in September, October, November to a vaccine, the comfort level that we've talked about will be much closer to there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we've talked everything from The Last Dance to college football.
We covered a lot of ground. Good
broadcasting,
job,
Colin Cowherd's social strategy. I mean, wow, this is a lot. So we'll have to do it again. I'd love to bring you on in a couple of months after we find out kind of how sports figures herself out, because I think it'll be interesting conversation on, I think, really the pivot, right? Like we talked about pivot this entire show, but if we're now broadcasting sports for the next 6 to 9 months with absolutely zero fans in the stands, I love what you brought up. It's like, do we focus on the betting? Do we pipe fans in? Do we not really care if fans are there or not? I mean, that's going to be an interesting conversation.
For sure. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you. Take it easy, David. Tell Will I said thank you also.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right, there she was, Bonnie Bernstein. That was a great conversation. Like I said towards the end, we got into a lot, from COVID to The Last Dance to Colin Cowherd's social strategy to, will certain cable networks, will they survive this pandemic? Just a lot of knowledge, especially what I'm really, and I know, Will, you and I have talked about this a lot, is, Will, now that people are now that people have seen these programs like The Jump or SportsCenter or what have you go to like a Zoom type Skype interface, will they now spend the millions and millions of dollars on these beautiful studios and these cameras that, weigh 1,000 pounds, or will they get a little bit more raw with it like we've kind of been seeing as of late? So that'll be very interesting. But I want to get her on the show in the next couple of months once we kind of see how sports comes back, because I'm really interested to get her take on how the broadcast side of things changes up, because we're not going to have fans in the stands. It's just not going to happen. So.
No, and I mean, even if there is a cure and everything, you're not going to be in like the big house in Michigan with 100,000 people anytime soon. So yeah, they're going to have to find a way to broadcast those games differently and make it exciting without people there. It's going to be a big challenge. It's
going to be interesting. I think the COVID-19 pandemic we've talked a lot about on this show, but it's really thrusted some of the linear networks and again, like some of the older executives to really look at diversifying their assets in terms of digital and social. And if it was going to take an extra 5 years for people to finally come around, I think this kind of like woke everybody up like, oh shoot, we better figure it out right this second. So it's going to be interesting. I think we'll look back at this time definitely, 5-10 years from now and say, oh, that pandemic was the reason why this happened, or why media as we know it kind of catapulted itself to a new era. No doubt about it. So thank you so much again to Bonnie for joining us on the program. Will, thanks for all your work to set that up as well. So thank you to producer Will. Thank you to Furker as always. We would love it if you guys check us out on iTunes and not only subscribe, but maybe give your boy 5 stars. We appreciate that so more people can see the program. Again, we hope we're bringing value to you during this difficult time. And we're still dropping that knowledge on a weekly basis. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for spending time with us. It's been another edition of the Business of Social podcast. My name is David Brickley. It's been powered by STN Digital.